I wish I could do is I wish I could do
Okay, so now you've all seen something about hypnosis or experienced it, if you went along with the suggestions and experienced some of them. What I'd like to do is talk about some of the basic facts and in particular go into theories. So this lecture will make a start on the theories. We'll carry on with that next week. And then in the last week, I'd like to talk about my particular approach to hypnosis. So as you've more or less experienced, what happens in a typical hypnosis session is first something called the induction. I only did that for 5 minutes. Maybe in other contexts you do it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But the induction consists of just what I went through, which is there's nothing especially that has to happen, except for the conventional induction. What you get is repeated suggestions of becoming more drowsy, more relaxed, more sleepy, more hypnotized. And basically that's just repeated for 15 minutes. And it might have something like I had of counting, going down steps and so on, but there's nothing that has to be there. Then after it's been suggested that you've entered a special state, some suggestions can be given. They can be divided up roughly in this way. Motor suggestions are suggestions that some behavioural action will happen, like magnetic hands that we did, heavy arm, levitating arm. 90% of people will experience one or other of the motor suggestions, so they're regarded as the easy suggestions in that sense. Challenge suggestions are suggestions that you'll try and do something, but you won't be able to do it. So the example of a motor challenge is the rigid arm that we did. You'll try and bend it, but you can't bend it. But you can have cognitive challenges like amnesia, the challenge to remember, but you won't be able to remember. About 50% of people respond to rigid arm suggestion. So that's more difficult than just a motor suggestion. Then the cognitive suggestions, which are on average the most difficult, involve hallucinations. Positive hallucination is the suggestion that you will perceive something that isn't there. So you'll see a pink elephant just there. Or in terms of the suggestions we did, that you'll hear the music from the next classroom, or that you'll feel the fly land on you, or that you'll hear the fly buzzing around. Negative hallucinations, which I didn't give any examples of, are suggestions that you won't perceive something that is there. So suggestions of blindness or deafness are negative hallucinations. They could be more specific than that you won't see the red things, you won't see animals, and so on. They're particularly difficult. Age regression, the suggestion you'll go back and be a certain age again. Either that's just sitting there with your eyes closed, you'll re-experience events that happened before, or that henceforth, including in your actions, you'll be like a 5-year-old child. Post-hypnotic suggestion. I said whenever you hear the knock. Don't know if anybody's right eyebrows are particularly itchy at the moment. That was the post-hypnotic suggestion. So these ones, taken as a whole, about 10% of people, the cognitive suggestions, the perceptual cognitive suggestions, respond to. Now, there's no way of telling how hypnotizable you will be without taking you through some hypnotic suggestions and counting how many you pass. There's no other method that's reliable enough that could give us an indication of your hypnotizability other than seeing how many hypnotic suggestions that you pass. And so scales have been developed since 50s or 60s that enable this to be done in a reliable way. The Harvard Group Scale is one of the standards that can be done in a group setting. The suggestions they don't have very many difficult suggestions. So it doesn't pick up the very highly hypnotizable people very well. The Stanford is done on an individual one-on-one basis. It does have difficult suggestions in. So it can be good at picking up the very highly hypnotizable, but imagine you want to pick up the 10% most hypnotizable people. With the Stanford, it's one-on-one, takes over an hour. You have to screen a lot of people. It's a lot of hours in order to get just your 10% highs or 10% lows. It's a very time-consuming process. So the Waterloo was developed, and that's the one that we have been using in some form at Sussex, where you can do in a group testing environment. But others have difficult suggestions in. So if you've been screened by us, if you're screened this year, you would have been put through a slightly abbreviated version of the Waterloo with 10 suggestions in, and takes fairly quick, 45 minutes. If you're screened in previous years, it would have been the full Waterloo with 12 suggestions and fairly lengthy induction procedure. It takes an hour, a bit over an hour to do. Who's taken part in our screening here? Oh, just one of you. Oh, a couple of you. Spanos at Carleton University developed a course which only takes about 40 minutes. I think it's 6 or 7 suggestions, so it's very quick. But it is sometimes people use it, but it's highly skewed. Most people come out as low on this. Most people don't pass many of the suggestions. Hypnotic suggestibility, various terms are used here. There's no agreement in the literature on about exactly how to use them, but the general rule is hypnotizability, hypnotic suggestibility, suggestibility, susceptibility are all used pretty much interchangeably, other than particular individuals who might have their own preferences. So suggestibility as measured on these scales is something like a stable personality trait, in that the test-retest correlation over a 25-year period is 0.75. So that's amazingly stable. On the other hand, it doesn't correlate with major personality dimensions like extroversion, introversion, neuroticism, stability. So we'll talk a little bit later about what does correlate with it. But as I say, the correlations such as they do exist, 0.2, 0.3, only just detectable by the human eye if you see the scatter plot of 0.2, 0.3. So the simple answer is we really don't know what determines a person's hypnotizability, which is why it's an interesting area to do research. So it seems to be a fundamental personality dimension to do with your ability to distort conscious experience, to distort sense of volition or reality. So it should be telling us something fundamental about consciousness. So let's have a look at the theories that are about. There were two main camps up into the 80s. That sort of 70s, 80s was sort of a golden age of hypnosis research, where there were some of the main theoretical perspectives were developed, experimental paradigms developed, and some of the main findings that we now know about hypnosis were established. So in one of those camps, which you call the relatively skeptical side, one of the most prolific authors was Nick Spanos, who was the student of Theodore Barber, who I mentioned before. Barber was a highly hypnotizable, and so he thought, well, there's nothing special to this. There can't be anything going on in hypnosis that we don't already understand in psychology, because if I can do this, any old fool can do this. So one of his students was Nick Spanos, and he carried on with the theme, there's nothing special going on in hypnosis, in the sense there's nothing going on that we don't already understand from our existing psychology. And the psychology that he took at the time was, you could say, roughly social psychology of the 70s and 80s. And one of the prime conclusions from the psychology of that period is that social context affects how we behave a lot more than people typically believe. So let's say I arranged some tables here, and then we allocated people where to sit and got them discussing. There could be someone sitting out on the limb where, by the arrangement of the tables, we know they'll be having a hard job making conversations with other people, because that's the layout. And someone else is very central with lots of people around him. Then afterwards you get people to rate how extroverted or introverted the different people were. And the person who was central is rated as quite extroverted, and the person out in the limb is quite introverted. But it can't be because they were extroverted or introverted, because we randomly assigned people to position. Nonetheless, the context determined how people behaved, and it was more than people generally thought the contextual effect should be, because they attributed the talkativeness of the different people to their personality. So if context normally determines behaviour more than you believe, we need to come up with other explanations for our behaviour than the context. So imagine you're on the stage and the hypnotist says, now you'll be a chicken. You look to the person on the left, and they're flapping their arms, and the person on the right is flapping their arms. You're standing in the middle, and everyone expects you to be a chicken. So there's a social context for you. Before you know it, you're clucking around, duck walking, flapping your wings, and you say, why on earth am I doing this? And because you don't appreciate the power of the social context, you say, well, I must be hypnotised. Isn't hypnosis a powerful thing? So this is essentially the socio-cognitive theory, or the Spanos theory. Hypnosis is a social influence situation in which we attribute our actions to hypnosis, not the social demands per se, or even ourselves, because we're given a ready-made explanation, hypnosis, or the hypnotist. So we don't need to postulate some special hypnotic trance state, according to this theory, or any special process involved in hypnotic responding, special meaning extra to the psychology that we already understand. But you can have a feeling of involuntariness. It's a misattribution, but it's just the sort of misattribution that social psychologists talk about anyway. We make misattributions when the social context causes us to do things, but because we have poor theories about just how powerful social context is, we misattribute social context to other causes. So in this case, we misattribute the power of the social context to hypnosis or the hypnotist. So this doesn't mean that people are necessarily lying, although Spanos prevaricates on this because he likes to play the skeptical role, but he doesn't need to postulate that. It can be a genuine misattributional process where the person is genuinely believing, therefore, that it was the hypnosis making them do it, it wasn't themselves. So what happens is, in hypnosis, is a person is simply responding to the demand characteristics. And there's pressure on them to respond to the demand characteristics, so the person ends up behaving as they believe a good hypnotic subject should behave. And that's the central idea that motivates that whole research paradigm, is as we manipulate demand characteristics, in other words, all the cues in the situation that tell a person how they should behave, you should see them changing their hypnotic behaviour to match the demand characteristics. And that indeed was what Spanos often did. Any questions about that theory? Yeah.
And maybe an obvious counter-argument is that we can self-hypnotize. So there is no social context when I hypnotize myself alone. I mean, what social cognitive theories answer to the fact that self-hypnosis is possible?
Yes, in fact we'll, probably not this lecture, but next week we'll come to that as a way of determining if people are faking. What happens when they're by themselves and they think they're not being watched. I mean, what someone in this tradition could say is that you're still striving to be a good hypnotic subject, and there's a sort of implicit audience in your mind. There's still the demand characteristics that you're responding to. But that, I mean, that would be a good thing in terms of faking. If people can self-hypnotise and respond even when they think there's no one watching, then that's an argument against them faking it. But you could probably have a version of this theory where there's still nonetheless are the mind characteristics in the situation. So that was the one side of the debate. The other side probably represent Hilgard as being the father figure of, and that is to say there's something going on in hypnosis that does arise in other contexts, but psychology hasn't been very good at pinpointing this process, and hypnosis gives us a special window onto it. And Hilgard comes at this with not paying any special attention to social psychology, but more to cognitive psychology. In fact, he comes up with a theory of the mind being a hierarchy of control structures in the 70s that looks just like standard cognitive psychology. I don't know if you know the name Norman and Chalice, who essentially presented this idea became the basis for neuropsychology and understanding executive systems. But this predated Norman and Chalice by about 10 years. So the idea is that you have cognitive control structures that can operate more or less automatically. So if you know how to play the piano, you see the input, the score on the piano, your fingers do the thing. That can just sort of happen by itself, as it were. You can just pass control over to this control structure and it does its thing. If there's a painful, noxious input, you get various automatic outputs, rise in blood pressure, pain withdrawal reflexes, and so on. So the mind consists of a set of control structures that can compete with each other for controlling behaviour. On top of that sits an executive ego that can decide, no, this one will control behaviour now this one, and so on. So he called it executive ego. It's really the same theory as the theories of executive processes that came about in neuropsychology and now in cognitive neuroscience, starting only about 10 years after Hilgard talked about it. So what happens in hypnosis is the executive ego can be split in two by what he called an amnesic barrier. So when you're lifting your arms or imagining flies, it's obviously you that's doing it. So he saw it as the executive ego as getting the relevant cognitive control structures to do whatever was needed. But it seems to you that you're not doing it, and that's because there's just been a bit split off that becomes in control of performing the suggestions, and the other bit is unaware of what's going on in there. One of the first observations that suggested this to Hilgard was in a classroom setting, much like this. He decided to do a demonstration on a single subject who sat in the chair, and he gave a deafness suggestion to them. And then the class sort of made various noises and so on to see if the person would respond. He didn't respond. But of course, the person did respond when Hilgard cancelled the deafness suggestion. So part of the person must have been aware of what was going on in order to hear the cancellation of the suggestion, to then say, now I can hear. So then Hilgard thought, well, I wonder if this person can recount what happened during the period in which he was deaf. So he said, there's a hidden part of you that really knew everything that was going on. And put my hand on your shoulder, I can talk to this hidden part. And he said, now tell me what conversations and what noises happened while you're deaf. And he got an account of the things that had happened that he had heard while he was apparently deaf. So this suggests, or at least it suggested to Hilgard, two parallel streams of consciousness. There was a part of the executive that was hearing things and controlling behaviour, but it was just the other part of the person who was unaware of this, because one stream of consciousness was not aware, the other stream was. Well, this is a general account of hypnosis. Then it's as if in hypnosis we've split your mind in two, and there's a hidden part of you that really does know everything that's going on. And he called this the hidden observer. But it becomes reintegrated when you, at least it can do, when you cancel the hypnosis. And a way of demonstrating this that became the most common experimental paradigm was in pain research. So you get a person to stick his arm in ice cold water. It's called cold pressor pain. You maintain the water temperature just a wee bit above 0 degrees. By a minute, the person's in excruciating pain. But the good thing about this is we know no damage is being done. No tissue damage at all can possibly be done by a minute in ice cold water, despite the excruciating pain that the person is feeling. So if you take pain ratings over the course of a minute, it goes up and up and up until it hits the roof. So you can give an analgesia suggestion, in other words, a suggestion that you'll experience no pain. Your arm is numb, you'll experience nothing, the pain will disappear, there'll be no more pain. And then the pain ratings, well, if it's a highly hypnotizable person, they can go pretty close to 0, if not 0, if they're really a highly hypnotizable person. On average, they can be at least halved. But if this is true, there's a part of the person who's still experiencing the pain. So Hilgard will say, when I put my hand on your shoulder, I'll be able to speak to a hidden part of you that really knows everything that's going on. So he puts the hand on the shoulder and you say, what pain do you feel? And you say, oh, it's excruciating pain. Take it off. The person says, no pain. You say, but did you feel any pain just now? They say, no, the whole time I've been sitting here perfectly comfortably, feeling no pain. Put the hand on the shoulder and they say, it's excruciating pain and it's been painful the whole time. So this is the hidden observer. And it's really, Hilgard didn't always like to talk about it as an altered state of consciousness, but having your ego split in two is an altered state of consciousness, I think. And so we can call this one, unlike the Spanish theory, as an altered state theory or state theory, yes.
So in the hypnotic state, which he says is another form of ego or consciousness, how come people are still not aware that it's them? They don't feel like it's them doing the motor actions.
Because when you talk to the person in the normal way, you're talking to this half. It's this half that knows what's going on. But you can contact with a hidden observer suggestion. But I think you make a good point. When you simply ask the person, what do you feel, why you end up talking to one half rather than the other half.
Yeah, why does... Because obviously you can't be conscious in two states at once.
Well, that's what he claims, parallel streams of consciousness.
Okay, but how... I mean, as you... How would you then experience... do you know what I mean? I can't really explain what I'm trying to say, but... like you...
Yeah, how can we experience...
So he's saying you are literally experiencing... You're
having two separate streams of consciousness, which is why the person can say, I am in pain and have always been in pain.
But you'll only ever remember one.
One at a time, that's right. Until you cancel. For example, in the deafness case, the person recounted the conversation.
Okay.
But before the hidden observer suggestion is given, they say, no, I was deaf, I didn't hear anything that was happening. I agree, you say, how can that be possible? So he's going on the reactions of subjects when you give them hidden observer suggestions.
Does this have any applications for sport to improve performance? Is it possible?
Well, hypnosis generally you can by imaginatively re-experiencing what you would do in performing a sporting move. Yes, and sports hypnotherapists often do exactly that. Like, were you thinking that's especially related to the Hilgard theory?
I don't know, but like during the actual sport, could you hypnotise them so they don't feel any pain during the sport?
That would be a good idea, to give analgesia, particularly if a person was inhibited from performing well because of anticipation of pain. But I don't know if that's been done. I don't really follow the details of what they do, but that's a good idea, yes. So, some reactions to this theory. The Spanos reaction is that the hidden observer is just another suggestion. So you're not getting to the essence of hypnosis. Of course, if you suggest a hidden observer, you're going to get a hidden observer, because highs are good at creating the experiences that you want. So Spanos, for example, did an experiment where I said there's a hidden part of you that experiences even less pain than you are now, and he puts the hand on the shoulder, they experience less pain. Or there's a hidden part of you that experiences even more pain than you do normally, puts the hand on the shoulder, there's even more pain. So he got whatever hidden observer he suggested, and he said, and therefore that's all there is to the hidden observer effect. And I guess the Hilgard camp would say, well, of course, if you suggest something, that's what you're going to get, but still, you need to. There remains a fundamental division of consciousness that is true regardless of response to specific suggestions. So I have that there. So that was the question. Is this an artifact of the demand characteristics? A suggestion, you suggest it an observer, so that's what you get? Or is it the essence of hypnosis? And there was a sort of a standoff about that. But I say that was 70s, 80s. Then sadly, I mean, both of those key figures died. Spanos because he was a amateur airplane pilot, crashed and died. And Hilgard was he died of old age. He was a grand figure of psychology. He wrote the 1930s textbook of animal learning that became used by everybody for some decades, and then turned to hypnosis in the 50s. But then in the 90s, we have people picking up both traditions. And on the dissociation side, we had Kenneth Baars, who also sadly died, but then his student Eric Woody, who's picked up dissociation theory and ran with it, and is the contemporary sort of proponent of dissociation theory. They wanted to change what Hilgard said. Only about half of highs show a hidden observer effect, so that's 5% of people show a hidden observer effect. So it's a very rare and difficult suggestion to respond to. On the other hand, it was the basis of Hilgard's main theory for all suggestions. So there seems to be a discrepancy whereby a suggestion, the evidence for your theory about how people respond to any suggestion is provided by only 5% of participants. So if the hidden observer is very difficult to find, how can it be the explanation for even magnetic hands, which a lot of you experienced just now? So they suggested what we need to do is we'll keep a lot of what Hilgard said, but instead of this notion of the executive ego being split in two, I think maybe something you were grasping at about something different about that concept. I'd wondered about, well, if there's part of you really experiencing pain, why is it useful to use hypnosis to reduce pain? Because according to the Hilgard theory, there's half of you that's in agony that then becomes integrated back with all of you at the end of the hypnotic session. Just struck me as slightly bizarre. So the Woody and Baars suggestion is what they call dissociated control. Here they call this dissociated experience, that we're going to split the essential executive in two. So there is one half of the person having certain conscious experiences and another half having other conscious experiences. And as I say, so that means half of you experiencing intense pain while undergoing the caesarean section, where the only form of analgesia is hypnosis, and the other half of you saying this is fine. But there's half of you in pain, there seems to be a problem. So what they said was, let's not split the executive ego in two. We'll suggest instead that it's weakened, so that we can take literally the person's suggestion that they don't have executive volitional control at face value. The reason why it feels like the person doesn't have volitional control is they don't have volitional control, and that's because the executive frontal system here has been put in such a weak state that it's only the habit system that's left able to control behaviour. So the hypnotic suggestions just directly trigger the corresponding control structure and don't go through the conscious executive system at all. Now this really is a state theory, because in order for suggestions to work we need to give an induction that seriously weakens the executive system. Otherwise, if there's some executive system, a good part of the executive system work, when you've got the suggestions to carry them out, you'll be doing it in a volitional way. So hypnosis is a functional prefrontal lobotomy, in their own words. Another theory that's been very popular is what you call Ideomotor theory. You could take some inspiration from William James, who talked about ideomotor action, how if his example was you're lying in bed, it's very cold outside, you know you have to get up, but it's so comfortable in bed, you stay in bed. But maybe 10 minutes later, at one moment, you find yourself out of bed. He says, how did that happen? Well, there was probably a lot of time when you're thinking about cold outside, don't want to be outside, warm in bed, don't want to be in bed. You've got conflicting ideas and images in your head about the actions that could be taken. But at some moment, just by chance as it were, the only image in your mind happened to be the one of getting up and getting on with things. Because it was uncontradicted, that image triggered the action and you're out of bed. Now this wasn't meant as a theory of hypnosis or involuntary action, it was just meant to be a theory of action, that ideas create motor actions. But it had been taken by people as possibly a theory of involuntary action, or theory of hypnosis. Baars, for example, Bernard Baars, who introduced the global workspace model, we talked about in the first lecture, that was his theory of hypnosis, when the only image in the workspace is a certain action that makes that action happen in an involuntary way. And it was the theory of the person who coined the term hypnosis around about 1840, so predating William James on this, James Braid. Braid, wasn't it? Yes. He coined the term hypnosis, and he came up with the idea of monoideism, one idea as the fundamental mechanism of how hypnosis happens. And it's a theory that I find crops up just by talking to people who don't know about hypnosis. They say, is hypnosis when you concentrate on one thing so much to exclusion of everything else? So there's perhaps something natural about that theory. But this is a case where we can say we know the theory is wrong, which is a useful thing to be able to say. So there's this experiment by Zemansky and Clark where they had highs engage in contradictory imagery. So for example, in the suggestion that you can't bend your arm, the high had to imagine his arm bending and describe what he was imagining, so we knew that at least the idea was going through his head of failing the suggestion of the arm bending by a certain angle. And what was interesting is the highs all kept on responding fully to the suggestions, even as describing, yes, I can see my arm bending by 30 degrees here, but I can't bend my arm. We know they didn't have a single idea in their head about the state of the arm because they described the conflicting idea of the arm bending. This did throw mediums off. Medium hypnotisable people found it hard to respond, but highs, they could still respond under these conditions. So it's not to do with having a single sustained image in your mind that's uncontradicted. That isn't the basis of hypnotic responding. Right. So I think we have time for one more theory, which I like because of its simplicity, although I think it happens to be wrong. Irving Kirsch's response expectancy theory. He says at the psychological level, it could be the case that expectancies directly cause the experiences and behaviours that are expected in a way that's unmediated by any other psychological process. So if you expect your arm to rise by itself, that creates the experience and behaviour of the arm rising by itself. So in that sense, hypnotic response is just a placebo, where placebo is where you expect to have certain experiences, and those experiences happen. So in this theory, there's no need to postulate an altered state of consciousness. We only need one psychological mechanism, and that's expectancy. And indeed, expectancies are one of the strongest predictors of hypnotic response. So I like the theory, as I say, for its simplicity. It's the power of belief and expectancy that we need to think about and use in a clinical context. So what we'll do in subsequent lectures is go through evidence for these particular theories. But at this point, I don't know if anybody has a preference for any of those theories more than others in terms of explaining their own experiences, behaviours, or just what you feel is plausible.
I quite like the dissociated control theory. That seems to be the most readily available one to me, I think.
Okay.
It seems to make the most sense.
Yes.
I think the socio-cognitive one for me, because it worked in this session, but when I did it before, there was just like a master student doing it, I think, before, and I didn't have much faith in her.
Okay, yes.
But I kind of have more confidence than you knowing about
That's
it.
nice to know, yeah.
So I think that's why it worked in this case.
Indeed, rated rapport with the hypnotist is a correlate of hypnotic response, so that's definitely a factor. Anybody else? Well, these aren't settled issues, but what we'll do is we'll, in fact, for the next week and the week after, we'll consider the evidence for the different positions, and also in 2 weeks' time I'll present my own take on what's happening hypnotically and the evidence for that. All right, thanks everyone. See you all in a week's time.